And our Mesh Doctor session starts with importing the objects generated in Reality Capture into Blender. We use the FBX format, so let's select the FBX importer, select all 3 files and click Import. Here we have it. Let's check that all textures have been imported indeed. I'm gonna go into the material preview mode to check it out. Right, it looks like the textures are in place. Now I'm gonna create 3 new collections. I'm gonna name them 01, 02, 03 and assign the model to each collection like that, so we can work individually on every mesh. Well, despite the fact that geometry is a little bit messy right now, it's ready for interior rendering anyway, and we could have made a render if we wished to. But instead, I'm gonna do some cleanup. First, I'll leave only the first model visible. I'm gonna press Tab to enter the edit mode and select the redundant faces and delete them. So C for the brush selection. We can just bulk select the faces like that, or we can select one of them and go select linked flat faces, and that will select all the faces within a certain threshold that can be adjusted. It's a fairly convenient method of expanding the selection to the faces with similar normals, and it can be complemented by the brush selection afterwards to tweak it, X to delete faces. Then I'm going to select the bottom faces and delete them as well, and this set of faces as well. Once again, the brush selection can be invoked with the C shortcut, and the fall-off, or rather the size of the brush, can be adjusted with the mouse wheel. Next, we can follow up with this side of the mesh and the top one, something like that. I sped up the footage just a little bit before it got boring. X and delete those faces. We have just this size to tweak, and then we'll move on to the Boolean tools. Okay, I searched linked flat faces from the Blender search bar. That's actually my preferable method of selecting this feature. I don't know why really, just a matter of habit, I guess. Okay, before we carry on with cleaning up this mesh, it is important to point out what would happen if we exported it out to Game Engine. Right now, most of the faces are facing in towards the tunnel, and that's how we would like it to be, and we can prove it by enabling the face orientation within the viewport settings. Basically, if the face is drawn in red, it is a back face, and it most likely would be transparent in a Game Engine. Once again, it's totally fine in this case because it's the interior polygons that are supposed to be opaque. Alright, I think that was important to point out. For further tweaking, I would propose to use the Boolean tools. I will start off by creating a cube. This will be our cutter mesh. I'm positioning it roughly to cut away this messy part of the building. And in the preferences, I'm going to go to the add-ons tab and make sure that I have the Bool tool add-on enabled, which I do. With this add-on, we can apply the Boolean operations much quicker. For example, select the cutter object, then shift-click on the mesh, press Ctrl and minus on the numpad, and that will automatically assign the Boolean modifier to the mesh, switch it over to the difference mode, and pick the object that serves as the difference operand automatically. Oh, actually, and it will also switch the visibility of the cutter object to bounds or to wireframe, depending on the settings. When it comes to a frequent use of booleans, this add-on is indispensable. Really, it's very convenient to do it like this. And before we have collapsed the modifier stack, we can move the cutter object interactively, which is also a very cool thing indeed. Sometimes the mesh can get pretty heavy, so the interactivity will be much less enjoyable. Say if it becomes so heavy that Blender starts to have performance issues. But anyway, we have such possibility. Here I'm cutting the door frame really accurately. You can already tell that the model gets much more clean. No more hellish candy floss of polygons all around the place. That's already something. I added yet another cube to adjust this door frame on the other side. And I think we're pretty much ready with this mesh. We just have to do something with an opening in the ceiling, because that's the most problematic area of this model, I think. And at any point we can go right click, convert to mesh, and that will collapse the modifier stack and make all the Boolean objects obsolete so they can delete it. It's useful if there are some performance issues, or maybe the viewport gets a little bit too cluttered for your taste and you want to free it up. So from time to time the modifiers can be applied. It's a pretty useful trick. Or they can be applied manually from the modifiers menu. But if there are more than, let's say, 5, then it makes sense to just collapse the mesh. Then I'm grabbing the lonely floating areas of faces with the help of the L shortcut to select linked. We can press the shortcut simply on hovering over these areas. And then I feel that this part needs some love too. And as we have mentioned, the ceiling, the hole in the ceiling. I think the cube positioned like this will serve as a nice Boolean object. So shift click on the main mesh with this one selected and Control minus to add the Boolean subtraction modifier, tweaking it after the fact ever so slightly, and I think that all modifiers can be applied at this point. So we have cleared up the first part of the mesh, the first part of the corridor. There are 2 more to go. But first, there are still a few texturing issues with this model that we can take a look at. Let me enter the dungeon with the help of the Shift and Accent Grave shortcut for the first person view. Sorry about the W's. So here we have a problem, and this part of the wall is a little bit too blurry. We can fix it. Not that it will be seen in the final render, it won't, but still I feel that it's a worthy exercise. So let's open the shader editor first and make the material shadeless by connecting the diffuse texture right into this surface input of the material. It makes sense from the perspective of tweaking the albedo or the diffuse texture alone without meddling with other properties of the shader. I've also switched the view transform of the color management to standard. That is needed for texture projection that we're gonna do in just a second. So let's say we have this pretty badly textured part of the wall. What can we do? Let's try projection. Firstly, we need a camera, so I created one, then pressed Ctrl, Alt and 0 on the numpad to make it an active camera and align it to the view. Let's make it a square ratio, 2K resolution to have enough pixels to work with. Then we need to render it out and save it as an uncompressed format like PNG. So image, save as. I'll create a separate folder for it called projection. And I'll call this one fix_01 and I will open it in GIMP. You can use any image editing application that you like. Okay, and now we can do whatever we like. We can paint on top of it, drag images from internet and overlay it. Or alternatively, I will just create a new layer. By default, it's created as a fully transparent layer, and that's exactly what we need. We're gonna paint on this transparency, or rather use the clone brush to clone some parts of the original image to cover the blurriness. Something like that. Make sure you have the sample merged checkbox enabled if you use the transparent layer for cloning. What I'm doing here is probably not the best showcase of the technique, because we could have used any type of external sources for overlaying and stuff like that. But anyway, I'm going to export as to save the transparent layer with the fixes we made. Let's call it fix_01b. And export it out as one of the formats with transparency, preferably uncompressed. PNGs or TIFFs come to mind. And once we've done it, it's time to get back to Blender. We need to import this image into image editor. So let me create a new window. We can press Shift F10 or open the image editor from this menu. And I think I'll just grab this and move over here. So we have our image meant for projection imported. Now we need to apply it. I selected the object, went into the texture paint menu. Oh, actually the diffuse texture layout got open automatically. That's very convenient. Thank you so much, Blender. Now we can go over to the tools menu at the top, and then into the options tab, external, and click apply. Oh, actually we need to click apply camera image instead. I remember it has B in the name, so it must be this file. Yeah, we applied the projection as you see here. I will press Ctrl Z to revert it and Ctrl Shift Z to bring it back, so we can see how it changed the look of the texture. Alright, awesome. What other techniques we could have used to eliminate the problem of missing texture data? We could have used the clone brush, obviously. This part seems to be awesome for testing, so let's get back into the texture paint mode, select the clone brush, place the 3D cursor to the region that we want to sample for the clone brush, and let's gradually in-paint this guy. Currently, the clone brush works in the screen space, so if you want to clone the parts of the texture without the distortion associated with perspective, you would need to do some work around. But first, a quick digression. I'm starting to feel claustrophobic. Maybe reducing the focal length would help, just like we did in reality capture. The xenomorph vision. So jumping into the edit mode, selecting this portion of polygons, Shift D to duplicate, R to rotate, so it's roughly in the same orientation as the floor. Don't separate it though, it needs to be a part of the same mesh. Back into the texturing mode. Now the clone brush would work perfectly fine because this object is in the same orientation as the floor, so to speak, or in other words, its normals face the same direction. So that is a quick tip that hopefully expands the usability of the clone brush in Blender. So we have covered this untextured part with something, and now we can just jump back into the edit mode and delete this temporary canvas. L to select all polygons, like this. X, delete all vertices. After doing the texture fixing work, we have to restore the connections in the shader. So back to the shader editor. I'm dragging the BSDF output into the surface input of the material. And as a quick refresher, in addition to the diffuse texture, we have the normal map that we generated in reality capture and that stores the geometrical details. The color space for it should be non-color or linear. I think it all looks great, really. Now, fast tracking forward to not torture you too much with the mesh cleanup work, but basically to recap some steps, what we need to do with the second and the third section of the corridor is the same process, really. The few useful tools that we have already explored would be the Select Linked Flat Faces tool and the brush selection, which can be invoked with the pressing of the C shortcut. The goal with the second and the third sections of the corridor would be just like that, get rid of the faces that are making it look like an apple pie, these redundant faces that need to be trimmed with the help of the standard modeling tools, or the Boolean operations. That, in my opinion, is probably the fastest way and the cleanest way to get rid of the unnecessary faces. As we have proven before, the worthy finishing touch would be to convert everything to mesh, and then to fix those parts of the texture that haven't received much data during reconstruction. For this, the clone brush and projections may come in handy. Though feel free to start with the clone brush because it's slightly more intuitive. So that's the process of mesh doctoring. The low poly model originated in reality capture after we have baked the textures from the high poly version of it. Finally, after making changes to any textures and quitting Blender, don't forget to press the save button. Thank you for watching. My name is Gleb Alexandrov and you have watched the tutorial on creating the larger environment from photoscan data. What we managed to do throughout this tutorial together is taking this pretty large environment scan made in reality capture, splitting it in 3 parts, 3 sections of a corridor, reprojecting the high poly details, then cleaning up the mesh so it can be used in game engines or for renderings, animations, whatever you want. It can be used in any kind of production and we can't wait to see what you will do with it.